I'm Christine Sloan, and today I'm interviewing an activist who's been speaking up for the Hazara people in Afghanistan. Homira Rezai is based in London. Homira, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Homira, tell us a little bit about the Hazara people. They are Persian speaking, and I sort of have a connection to that because I speak Persian. So tell me a little bit about the Hazara people in Afghanistan.
So the Hazara people are an ethnic group in Afghanistan. Like you said, they're Persian speaking. Majority of Hazaras practice Shia sect of Islam, but we also have Ismaili Shias, we also have Sunni Hazaras, as well as Christians and people of different faith within our community. We are very different in terms of our physical features, so we look very Far East Asian because of our region, which is Turkic Mongols. That's what we are, but of course we are a native to Central Asia, and we are a very diverse group of people. There's about 12 different tribes within the Hazara ethnic group.
Now, the Hazara people have faced persecution for decades, especially under the Taliban rule between 1996 and 2001. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I think for people to understand the persecution of Hazaras during the Taliban regime in the 90s, it might be easier to go back a little bit further than that and where the persecution of Hazaras started. Hazaristan used to be an autonomous region where Hazaras sort of were independent. Different areas in Hazarajat or Hazaristan used to be called, people had their mirs or their chief of the area, and everyone was happy. But in the 1700s or in 1800s, the Pashtuns wanted to invade Afghanistan, wanted to invade the region and make it Afghanistan. So there's an area called Kafiristan. They invaded Hazaristan and they made the region into Afghanistan, which of course the northern part of Afghanistan used to be part of Khorasan or the Persian Empire. And so they started this campaign against the Hazaras, and in the 1890s, they massacred 62% of the population, and they enslaved thousands of people, displaced so many, and we have a lot of Hazaras in Iran, in Pakistan, in many Central Asian countries as a result of this displacement. And Hazaras were slaves legally in Afghanistan until 1923. But of course, the persecution, the discrimination against the Hazaras, illegal taxation continued. And what was worse for the Hazaras was that because they were sort of pushed in the high mountainous areas of Afghanistan, they were isolated. So it was very hard for them to be able to develop in that area. A lot of cities such as Kandahar, Zabul, Ghor, and all of these big, large cities that had a lot of potential in terms of being able to, for example, for crops and stuff, were taken away from them and they were given to Pashtuns. So for hundreds of years, we didn't manage to sort of integrate into the government or into the wider society, led to this isolation. And during the 90s, when the Taliban regime came to power, we saw the same campaign which Abdurrahman Khan in the 1890s used for the Hazaras. And that was using the Shiism, because majority of Hazaras practice Shia, as a way to dehumanize the Hazaras and legitimize the killing and persecution of Hazaras.
And just to point out, the Taliban are Sunni.
Talibans are Sunni, yes. Taliban leadership in Afghanistan right now is majority Pashtun as well, and that's something that we have to sort of understand or point out to understand the historical persecution of Hazaras by this ethnic group. So when the Taliban regime came to power in the 90s, they had a slogan that used to say, Tajiks to Tajikistan, Uzbeks to Uzbekistan, and Hazaras to Goristan, which means graveyard or go to hell. So that was sort of the campaign that they started again in the 90s. And they would also used to tell the Hazaras that you can either convert to Islam or you can leave the country. And they continued their campaign against the Hazaras, leading to thousands of deaths. And one example that I can give is in August In 1998, they went on the killing frenzy. And according to Human Rights Watch and Washington Post, they killed over 10,000 Hazaras in Mazar Sharif. And majority of those was in a 3-day killing frenzy. And they went there, they targeted the Hazaras, and within 3 days, they killed more than 10,000 Hazaras. And of course, this sort of targeted killings continued throughout the country. So under the Taliban, Hazaras have suffered a lot.
So right now, Homira, I am hearing from a lot of people actually within Afghanistan, within your community, who are terrified of the Taliban. A lot of people are hiding in their homes. Tell me about what you're hearing within Afghanistan right now.
I am in contact with my relatives, both in Herat, in Kabul, and many other parts of the country. And people are terrified, but more so Hazaras, because like I said, the previous treatment of Hazaras by the Taliban, because they know they're at risk. And there's a set of group, of course, they're targeting all Hazaras. There's been so many cases of civilians, for example, have 45 civilians were killed in Malistan district. This is sort of, we see that a lot. But
have you heard of any casualties right now after the Taliban after the Taliban took over?
Yes, so we saw 6 Hazaras got killed in Behzud today. We had Amnesty International report torture and massacre of 9 Hazara men in Ghazni. We have the Afghanistan's Independent Human Rights Commission reported 45 civilians that got killed and massacred in Malistan. And so these are just reported. There has been many unreported cases where Hazaras were targeted for being Hazara. And one case this was just before they took over Kabul, there's a video on social media that they posted, is where they asked this random Hazara on the street, and the Taliban asked this guy, says, "Are you Hazara?" And when he says yes, they shoot him point blank, and they go around, celebrate, saying, "Allahu Akbar, thank God we killed a Hazara." So they are, yes, there's been several cases, many cases where they're targeting Hazaras.
This is awful, Homira. Now, I know that you fled Afghanistan back in 1993 with your family. I know you were really young, but this has been with you for years, because you really, I know, as just someone who fled Iran, I know that it never leaves you. Afghanistan's always in your heart, right? I want to ask you what that was like to flee Afghanistan with your family.
Yeah, so I actually left in 2006 at the age of 13, coming to the UK.
My apologies for the date. I apologize. You were born in 93.
Yes.
So you're about 28. Okay.
Yes. Growing up in Afghanistan, we were terrified of Taliban. It was, I say this as a joke now, but the impact that it had on our psychological being was a lot. So, for example, if kids would be naughty, or if they did something, they'd be like, "Don't do that, the Taliban's going to come." And sort of that is the sort of fear that is sort of instilled in our brain from a very young age, because that's how scary they are, and that's how much the Hazaras fear the Taliban and their regime. And, coming to the UK, of course, the UK gave me so many opportunities where I had the right to go and get education, I had the right to work, I had the right to contribute to the society. And as a result, I feel privileged to be able to do that. But we're seeing what is happening in Afghanistan. Millions of girls will no longer be able to be part of a society that they have the basic human rights, to be able to do that, the basic human rights to be able to go and get education, to contribute to the society, to build a society. But unfortunately, half of the population has been stripped away from that right.
We're hearing the Taliban spokesperson talking and saying that, women will be able to work, they'll have a right to work. I know there's been concern about journalists as well, female journalists. They claim they'll work, but I haven't seen any female journalists in the past several days on Afghan TV. So I want to ask you, do you believe the Taliban, this new and improved Taliban they claim to be, do you believe that they're going to allow women to work and allow women to have the rights they had before?
Oh, absolutely not. And I think there's one flaw that people need to understand is that they're saying that the women are able to go to school up to class 6. So how would women be able to contribute to the society and work if they are only educated on a primary level?
So wait,
How
so
will that work?
they're being told, and this is important, that they'll be able to go to elementary school, but not beyond that. I want to make that clear.
Yes, yeah. So they, in many districts, they have closed girls' schools, and girls, only little girls up to class 6 or primary school are allowed to go. But at the same time, they're saying women will have the right to work. How will that work? So there's no way, and I can't bring myself to believe a group of terrorists, a cartel, the world's biggest cartel organization, to come and tell me, where they have lied again and again over the past 20 years, that they will give rights to women. Absolutely not. It's a PR stunt. Once the world keeps sort of leaves Kabul and no longer covers as much as they're doing now, everything will start and they will show their true face.
Now, you remember Afghanistan because it sounds like you were about 13 when you fled. Tell me what it was like living under Taliban rule.
Well, one of the years that I remember specifically, and I think it was in around 1998, 1999, was we had an increased death rate in the village and in the district because of starvation. So the Taliban had closed the highways and the roads, and the import and export of goods were actually stopped from the districts. And that led to starvation of the people in districts. And we didn't have basic things such as rice and flour to be able to feed the people, to be able to feed the children. And I remember that very specifically because, for example, when we were hungry and stuff, and, people had to portion their food. And so that itself has given us traumatized a lot of people. We're living with this collective trauma of a community, of a generation, 2 generations that the Taliban has given us.
Were you allowed to go to school as a young girl?
No, we didn't have school. So all the schools for girls were closed. And it wasn't until 2003, with the help of UNICEF and the diaspora community, that in my village, they were able to build a school. And that was when girls and boys started to attend schools.
Wow, so you never had education for the early part of your life?
No, unfortunately, again, that is a direct consequence of the Taliban regime, where I was deprived of primary or early childhood education living in Afghanistan.
Were you, did you see any of the Taliban coming after women, and hurting them in any way when you were a child?
So the village that I lived in was sort of, we were in a neighborhood with the Pashtun community. So the presence of the Taliban was limited because my village was very isolated. And of course, because of the fear of the Taliban, there wasn't a lot of traveling between different villages or different districts because of the presence of Taliban. We did see them going around, and I do know of people, of Hazara leaders being targeted by them if they ever see the potential, if they ever saw the potential that this person, usually a man, had the potential to mobilize people and resist. But in my village, because we abided with every rule that was, they imposed, we didn't experience, in my village at least, targeting of women when I was growing up.
Now, you said that women had to, obviously, did young girls wear a burqa, or is it that you wore the burqa after 6th grade, or how did you wear a scarf, veil, or how did that happen for you as a child?
So women in Afghanistan at that time had to wear the burqa if they went outside. But for little girls, because I was still a young girl there, we only had to wear the scarf, and we obviously had to cover up everything.
So for people to understand, in Afghanistan at that time, after sixth grade, you're sort of considered to be a woman, right? And there are these terrifying stories of that I interviewed women in Afghanistan under Taliban rule, where the Taliban would go and just kidnap young girls who were 12 or 13 and sort of marry them off.
We see that now. We've actually had cases from Herat and many other cities where they have kidnapped and forced girls and widowed women as young as 12 and are forcing them to marry their fighters.
It's just awful, awful, Homira. What are you asking the world? Because I've written about this and I've said, with Iran, Iranian Americans, Iranians within Iran waited for 40 years. They've watched women and girls be persecuted, but the world sort of just not paid attention to this, not talked about it. And my concern is that when the cameras stop rolling, when the last American is pulled out of Afghanistan, the world may forget about Afghan women, girls, the Hazara community. What does the world or the US need to do?
I think it's everyone's obligation. It's their humanitarian obligation to ensure that that doesn't happen. We have sacrificed so much in Afghanistan as a British community. We have given 20 years we were there. We've sacrificed lives. We've spent billions of pounds in Afghanistan to give women hope. Now, majority of Afghanistan's population is under the age of 25. They never experienced the full extent of the violence of Taliban. And these are the women that have now been abandoned. We gave them hope, we gave them dreams, we gave them ambition that you're right, you can go to school, you can get a job, you can contribute to society. We can't just abandon them like that. And more importantly, it's the Hazaras, for example, are at risk of experiencing another genocide. And for the international community to completely forget it and to abandon them, it's a crime against humanity. And the international community needs to recognize that the Hazaras are at risk of genocide.
Do you believe that Hazara should have special status, perhaps to leave Afghanistan if they want to? And at this point, it seems like so many people just cannot get out.
I mean, yes, everyone in Afghanistan is at risk. Afghanistan now is under the rule of a terrorist organization. But for the Hazaras, it is different type of risk. Like I've been saying, that we are at risk of genocide. Taliban possibly will commit genocide against the Hazaras, given that in the past couple of days or like the past week, we have seen an exponential increase of targeted attacks against Hazaras. So Hazaras should definitely be recognized as a vulnerable group, or as a group that's at risk of genocide, and their situation needs to be distinguished from the rest of people in Afghanistan.
So, the concern here is that in 2-3 weeks, the Americans, the British may just forget about what's going on in Afghanistan. And possibility of the Taliban shutting down internet. I'm already hearing that people are having problems buying or purchasing credit cards to make phone calls outside of Afghanistan. That concern that they could just like Iran, shut down the internet and we have no communication, or we can't see what's going on in Afghanistan. How could we keep an eye on Afghanistan and the Hazara people and the women in Afghanistan and the girls?
I think it's a very tricky situation, because the blackout of information is something that everyone is very worried about Afghanistan. But I think ensuring the international community to have a humanitarian corridor in Afghanistan, to ensure that the Afghans being able to leave the country and being able to communicate what is happening in there is very important. I mean, I do understand there isn't much that we can negotiate with the terrorists, but ensuring that we at least try to maintain and to safeguard some of the groups in Afghanistan is really important.
Do you think that when we negotiate with the Taliban, or we sort of communicate with them? Do we need to put the rights of Afghan women, girls, the Hazara community, and other people who could be persecuted on the table and say, we do not talk to you unless you accept that these people have rights in Afghanistan?
I believe so, yes, 100%. But then from our experience with them in Doha, we can see how they act and react with such demands. We were fighting for the rights of religious minorities in Doha for them for months, and they couldn't come to an agreement for that. So it is extremely difficult to be able to negotiate with the terrorist organization, but at the same time, they are after being recognized as a legitimate government. So that is something that we can use as a card, I guess, that they are presenting on the table to be able to safeguard these groups.
So be able to say, listen, we're not going to recognize you. We're not going to legitimize you unless you protect these people within Afghanistan. That's what you're saying, right?
I think that, I personally don't see many other options because, like you said, there is a very high risk of Afghanistan going to information blackout, not being able to know what is going on. We have to admit and sort of come, I guess, check with the reality that they have taken over Kabul. They have destroyed the infrastructure that the Afghans built in the past 20 years. And when we have to start to sort of accept the reality and then start to safeguard the groups that are most at risk.
So, I just want to end this with, you said you have family still in Afghanistan. Have you been in touch with them? How are they doing? Are they safe right now?
Safe is something that I don't think anyone is in Afghanistan. I do check up with my relatives, my family there. Everyone's devastated. Hazaras were given the right to education, and so most of my relatives and cousins were able to get education. They were human rights defenders. They were women's rights defenders. They worked in the military. They worked in NDSF.
Wow.
And these are the people that are at risk right now, and to see them to sort of in this state is very traumatizing for me. And more so because I'm sitting here in my safe home, in my comfortable chair, and not being able to do anything for them. And my cousins had to destroy everything that they worked for in their lives, including the university degree, including the fact that they have worked in different organizations. So if when the Taliban are searching for their homes, they're not going to find these documents. And I'm sitting here with my degree on the wall and seeing them just everything that they've worked for has now gone down the drain. It's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. I can't imagine. I can't comprehend the feeling of what that's like.
I know what you're talking about. It's that survivor's guilt that exiles have who are in other countries safe, and you are doing everything you can to speak up for them, and that is so admirable. Are your family members, the women, are they afraid to go out? I assume a lot of people are sort of just locking themselves in their homes, but you're saying that the Taliban are going door to door in trying to find people who perhaps may have contributed to the Americans or the British.
Yeah, some of my female cousins that I've spoken to, they haven't left the house since last Friday. They're scared. They're very scared. They're, like I said, because they are very scared the Taliban are going to be knocking on their door. They have destroyed all of the relevant documents that they showed they were active in the society, just so they can survive. But Taliban are going door to door, identifying people, marking people's doors with bright paint to say this is the house that we need to come back to. And it's terrifying, for families who are here, and we don't know if I wake up the next morning, if I phone them up and they say, well, this person's gone and missing, Taliban has come to my house. It is daunting. It is heartbreaking, and I think majority of people in the diaspora community haven't really been able to process what is actually happening in there because we're so worried about our family members there.
Are your family members going to be able to come out?
There is nothing, for example, different countries have different schemes to be able to relocate some Afghans from Afghanistan. But a lot of this, especially from the Hazara community, we were so focused with the development of the civil society in Afghanistan that they worked within the community, and so they didn't really have much connection with the British government or the American government. They weren't involved with the military or the NATO troops, etc. So they're not really eligible for any of these relocation schemes. And unfortunately, the very people who spearheaded the change, the civil change in Afghanistan, are now abandoned there. So they can't leave the country.
A New Jersey congresswoman has sponsored a bill that would give special status to Afghan women and girls if they want to come to the United States. Do you think the Hazara people should also have some kind of status in going to other countries or even coming to the United States?
Absolutely. I think especially Hazaras who are now stuck in many other refugee camps, especially in Indonesia, they need to be relocated and settled elsewhere. The Hazaras from Afghanistan, if they should be given special status to be able to relocate in other countries. I can't emphasize enough on the level of risk that the Hazaras are in Afghanistan.
Homira, thank you so much for this conversation and your bravery to speak and to speak up for the Hazara community in Afghanistan that right now has no voice. I really appreciate this.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to do that.
Thank you.